Converted Man here. What are words? I've covered this topic a few times on my channel. So, just to show that I've done that, here's me saying, what is an atheist? Yep, talked about that there. Here we go again. The meme of that you're not an atheist, you're an agnostic. Covered that. Yep. And here we go. What the word atheist is topic. Yeah, I've talked about this before. I was going to make a whole edited video on this. I was like, wait a minute. I've done this. I've talked about this before. Why does it keep coming up? It's not that hard. There are this simple chart that you can find online that I think covers it. But, maybe that's too simple. Maybe, it's not nuanced enough, or something. I don't know. Let's get it open here. Okay. All right. So, I think that's pretty straightforward. I think that explains the positions of theists and atheists fairly well. It says agnostic, it's possible to be 100% certain. Agnostic, it's not possible to be 100% certain. And then there's a theist believes in a God, atheist doesn't believe in a God. Then you have the versions that the category. Agnostic theist is 100% sure that there is a God. Agnostic atheist says there is no God for 100% sure. Agnostic theist believes in gods but doesn't claim to know 100%. So it's just a belief, not a state. So, and agnostic atheist. So the Gnostic theist would say there is a God. The Gnostic atheist would say there is no God. And the agnostic theist or agnostic atheist would say, I don't believe in God. And also these have also been categorized into weak or strong positions has been another way. And that is one way to understand that. There's another chart that's a little bit more nuanced that I found. That goes into atheism and then a subcategory and then, the subcategory. So strong, moderate, weak, strong, and then there are no gods, there is a God and all the things between. And that gets it, that does fairly well again. And, okay, that's pretty simple of one way, another way to understand it. But the problem, I think, well, there's many problems, but it's hard to know where the problem starts. But I think maybe the problem starts with the word God itself. So we're going to get that up here as soon as it shows up. There we go. Yeah, there we go. Come on, get up here, God. All right, so we got, God means more than one thing. And here I've reduced it down to two gods. But the word God means this thing or that thing. And which God are you even talking about? And that's a problem because they say there is a God or I believe in God. And you're like, well, what do you even mean by God? I don't even know what you're talking about yet until you tell me which version of what God. So that's a problem. That's a big problem that there is. Now, the word agnostic, actually, you can kind of pin down that word. Here's different definitions from across the internet. From Google, agnostics, person who believes nothing is known or can be known, the existence and nature of God. And then Webster seems to kind of agree with that, and then Wikipedia agrees with that. Dictionary Cambridge agrees with that, and Dictionary.com agrees with that. They all basically say the same thing. It's a position of saying you can't know if there is or isn't a God, which is kind of different than that chart outline for us on what agnostic means, because when you put the word agnostic in front of another word, it kind of changes what agnostic is, maybe, I guess. And there's a guy that coined agnostic way back when, and then debate was had about what it means and how it works and what it's for and all this. And It's just so annoying and frustrating, but natural language is a bitch, and it just doesn't want to be pinned down. There isn't, I believe, I don't believe, I don't know, but I believe, I don't know, but I don't believe, um, that's a position you can hold, so how, we are really complicated creatures as far as statements about reality that we can have. Yes, no, maybe, I don't know, impossible to say yes or no. No to some, yes to others, maybe to others, yes to one, no to others. I don't even know what the word is, or the word is incoherent. So, these are all positions that one could hold. But why does it matter so much what the damn word means at all? I don't believe in God. That's it. Very simple. I just don't believe in God. Whatever God is, I don't even know, but I don't believe in it. And, well, your label can't be this. I don't like people telling me what my label can or can't be. You need to call yourself agnostic, not atheist. No, I don't. I call myself skeptic. How about that? And I call myself atheist and agnostic atheist and a lot of other labels like awesome, amazing lobster god, whatever. I want to call myself, that's my label, and you don't get to tell me how to define it. I get to tell you how it's defined. That's how words kind of work, is we humans say, here's what the word means, broadly speaking, and the zeitgeist says, yeah, that's how the word is. And when it comes to the word atheist, like it or not, the original version of it is only part of it now. And appealing to tradition of that's how it was always used or whatever doesn't matter. The word has changed. There's now two meanings to this word. One is there isn't a God, and the other is I don't believe in God. And it's unfair that you can switch back and forth. It doesn't matter. That's how the word is. Okay, that's just, the American Atheists, of course, their website says atheism is just the position that you don't believe in God. That's it. They really try to simplify it for everyone. And it's like, yeah, I agree. And many people have that position of this is what this word means. And I've talked about it before. I've told theists many times, this is what this word is, like it or not. Doesn't matter that you don't like it. Doesn't matter that you don't understand it. Doesn't matter that you want it changed. Some people have made almost a career out of trying to get people to accept that atheists should be viewed in a certain way. It's like everybody should use the dictionary definition of atheism according to Stanford philosophy, which is the strong version, there is no God. And if you use the word atheist, that's what it means. Because if we all did that, then we wouldn't have this debate anymore. I'm like, oh yeah, we would. We'd still have debate about words because we love debate. We love to, and it misses the whole point. Who cares about the word? In the end, it doesn't change anything. It doesn't prove that you're right about God. It doesn't prove that I'm wrong about not God. Whatever my position is, whatever I mean by this word, who cares? I don't believe in your God. That's what should be the focus that we need to be interacting with is your God real? Yes or no? And if you can't say yes to that, do you believe in your God? Yes or no? Okay. And why do you believe? Now, I had a conversation with Randal quite some time ago, and that's, in the link in the description there. Found him to be a very pleasant individual. I thought he was kind and courteous. Was kind of taken aback by his very moderate views on many things. I found that to be very refreshing. He certainly has a lot of books that he's put out about, Christianity and his position. And I think he's trying to get Christians kind of to make more sense and to deal with the atheists in the way that we're telling the theists to deal with us. Maybe, I don't know, but it's kind of hard to figure out what it is he's trying to do in that way. But here in this video, he seems to almost reset back to this age-old, worn-out debate about what the word atheist means. And it's like, it means I don't believe in God. Why fight that? Why do you need it to not be that? Why do you think that it needs to be agnostic? And so at any rate, so that's the video we're going to be looking at, is some conversation on proof that God exists. And so check it out.
So I came across this tweet today from quote unquote Maximum Atheist. First, a comment on the handle. If you
All right, we don't need to comment on the user handle. That's just irrelevant. So skip.
describe yourself, people describing themselves as a maximum Catholic that's kind of suggesting some degree of fanaticism on this and how they're. And the meme says name something Christians say when they know they are losing an argument with an atheist.
Okay, so this is a meme template, and I don't know about you. I don't take memes seriously. They're jokes. And so, I mean, I guess it's something to talk about, but I do not take memes seriously. I'm not going to analyze a meme or whatever, but I mean, you're free to do it, but I'm just saying, like, it's a joke. Who cares? But yes, name something Christians say when they're losing an argument with an atheist. You're gonna go to hell, or you'll find out that you're wrong when you're dead, or something like that, or you really secretly believe in God. There's a lot that would show up on the Family Feud board. That might be actually fun to do, is get a bunch of atheists and ask them poll questions that we could put up on a Family Feud style thing later or something. But at any rate, the meme says you can't prove that you can't prove God doesn't exist, or something like that, right?
And the Maximum Atheist gives an example. Their answer is prove that God doesn't exist. So the idea here being that when a Christian, when you provide counter evidence to their view that they can't respond to, they will say, well, you can't prove God doesn't exist.
I have heard that. I've heard and read this many times, that not just, well, I mean, primarily interact with Christians, but I've seen others, do it. Yeah, it's true. You can't prove it doesn't exist, because it's a concept that is essentially a universal concept in a way, and it is framed in such a way that it denies being disproven. But that's not something that's a good thing. It is true, I agree, but it doesn't matter, because the burden is to prove it does exist, not to disprove its existence.
And I agree with Maximum Atheist in the implication here that that's not a good rebuttal. It's not a good retort. It's not a good response. Really, it's a deflection, because the fact that you can't prove something doesn't exist doesn't thereby give you a good ground to believe it does exist.
I'd actually say that not having a way to disprove it is a problem, scientifically speaking, because you need some way to say that if X is not true, then this thing falls apart. There needs to be a way to test the idea, and there isn't when it comes to whatever God is. And that suggests that the idea is built to be immune from criticism. And so it's not that it's real, it's actually, this suggests that it isn't real by virtue of that you can't prove it isn't real because condition X is true. So we need something, as B.S. Lewis put out, quite some time ago, this idea of what what thing doesn't count for God? What thing can you point to that isn't God? So that we need an example of not God. So we have some way to compare and contrast. If everything's made from God, then there's nothing to compare not created with. And there's other problems. If there's no way to falsify God, that's a big problem.
So just because you can't prove something is false doesn't give you a good reason to believe it is true. So insofar as that's what the Christian is doing here, they're simply deflecting from counter evidence by presenting an unreasonable, indefensible standard of belief. And it's right to call them out on that. Now, the thing is, however, that given this individual refers to themselves as a maximum atheist, I'm guessing they don't have the same standard of internal critique for atheists that they apply to Christians, which is
Okay, you're focusing far too much on a username. This is a kind of a peek into somebody's psychology or attempt at that based on their username. I've had that happen every now and again with my name. Like, oh, deconverted man, why did you pick that name? What does it mean? It's just a name, okay? It doesn't mean anything. Let's attack the argument, not the person.
what you would tend to expect with a fanatic. Someone who describes themselves as a maximum X is that they're not going to have the same internal self-critique on their own position.
How do you know that, though? I mean, that's your subjective view of them. Did you interact with them? Did you ask them questions? Did you look at other things? You're just basing this on their username? That's not logical.
So I thought I would help out by posting my own comment. So I said, the atheist equivalent of this is, I don't believe God doesn't exist. I'm just without belief in God.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that is a statement that one can make, and it is essentially, it's the same thing, just worded differently. I don't believe God exists. And also, I'm without belief in God. Whichever version doesn't really matter because it's the same thing. I don't see how that's the atheist version of this meme. That doesn't mean that I'm losing a debate when I say it. If I say it, I'm probably trying to clarify my position in regards to God. So we'll see if there's any sort of justification for this response.
The point here being that sometimes the person will describe themselves as an atheist, which in terms of the standard traditional definition, going
Appeal to tradition is illogical. Okay, it doesn't matter what the word used to mean or how long we use the word in any given way. Words change over time. The meaning of the word atheist has multiple meanings today, two at least, and it is there's no God, and also I don't believe in God. That's it. Whether you like that or not, whether you accept that or not, it is true. That's it. There are two definitions of this word in the zeitgeist.
back centuries was a positive claim about the nature of reality. And that claim was that there is no such being as God who exists. That's what that person was saying. So it is a denial of the existence of God, a belief that God does not exist. But sometimes when you offer people who have described themselves as atheists evidence that God does exist, they will then, instead of responding to that evidence, they will redefine their belief by saying, it's not that I believe God doesn't exist, it's that I'm without belief that God does exist.
Well, you mentioned evidence for God. I don't know what you're talking about. There isn't any evidence for any version of any God. All that there is are bad arguments for God that I've encountered at any rate. If you mean evidence in the way that I mean evidence, which is empirical evidence, repeatably testable, in some way, shape, or form, scientific evidence, that's, the sort of evidence I have for anything that's around me. That's the sort of evidence that I'm looking for in regards of any claim, let alone God. And when it comes to that, there isn't that, Period. End of story. No doubt in my mind, there isn't evidence for God. There are only arguments. And I say they're bad arguments because every argument I've heard or read thus far has had one or more logical fallacies in it. I can't claim that all arguments are fallacious because I don't know about all the arguments, but I know a lot of them, and none of them are without fault. In fact, it is extraordinarily likely that given the fact that there's no evidence for God, that does suggest that there's no possibility that there could ever be a sound argument for God. Because in order to have a sound argument, you have to have something real to base your argument on. And the only way to establish that something is real is to have empirical evidence, repeatable tests for it of some sort. And if you don't have that, then you just don't have anything. And that's been the only problem, of the atheist versus the theist. The theist thinks that they have evidence for God, but they don't have evidence for God. They only have bad arguments for God.
Which is really a way of moving the claim of atheism into something that is closer to what we would historically call agnosticism.
And I covered what agnostic means according to several dictionaries, which is the position that you can't know if there is or isn't a God. But yes, there's the Cambridge Encyclopedia of Philosophy that has quite a long paragraph about what agnostic means, and that doesn't agree with those dictionaries. The dictionaries reflect the zeitgeist of humanity to some degree. They're not really exactly perfect, though, because we humans decide what words mean to us and screw whatever anyone else thinks. But the majority of people that have this idea can agree upon that this is the way to view this word, and that seems to be the case for the word agnostic. It seems that the zeitgeist is it means you can't know if there is or isn't. But it also has a second meaning where if you put the word agnostic in front of theist or atheist, that it means something a little bit different. It means that they're saying, I don't believe in or I don't know if there's a God. So I'm not saying that there isn't, but I'm saying I don't believe in it. Or I do believe in it, depending on which version you're going for. But again, this is nothing but an appeal to tradition or appeal to historicity. Yeah, it might have been used that way at some point. Actually, if you look at the word agnostic, no, it kind of was, but it kind of wasn't used in that way. In fact, the moment it was coined, it seems like there was people disagreeing. There was Christian, in fact, reading from the Stanford's philosophy entry about it. It said that some theists were calling themselves agnostic because they worshiped the unknown God. So some Christians were calling themselves agnostic, and also Christians were called atheists at one point. But that doesn't change what the words mean. It just means that they were called that at some point. So that's not how the words are used today, and that's all that matters is how we use them today.
Being without belief in God's existence or non-existence. So this person has gone from a position of saying there's no such person as God, or I do not believe there's such a person as God, to saying I do not believe or disbelieve that there's such a person as God, which is, again, agnosticism. Now they may then say, well, okay, that's soft atheism or weak atheism. And here we're just into kind of semantic games, would say.
It's not semantic games because that is how the words work. And it is attempting to say, here is where I belong in this framework. So it's not games, it's just clarifying the position. But this is so far down deep the rabbit hole. It's very odd. I don't know. Okay.
say, because fine, you can call yourself a weak or soft atheist, but really what you've done is stepped outside of making any truth claim at all. So you're just not part of the conversation.
Yes, you are. A theist can say, I believe in God. That claim has no burden of proof because belief statements do not have the burden of proof. That's how it works in logic. If you say, I don't believe in God, if you say, I do believe in God, you don't need to prove that at all. And I leave people that say that alone. I don't need to analyze their videos for logical fallacies. I could, but I don't need to because they're not stating anything about reality other than what they believe or don't believe. Now, I would like to know why they believe or why they don't believe because they might have valid reasons to believe or not believe. But they're part of the conversation regardless of their stance. There's still a conversation to be had. So this just dismisses portions of humanity because they don't label themselves the way that you want them to, so therefore they're not part of a conversation now? What nonsense is that? You can have a conversation with somebody regardless of their stance on any given position. You know, they might believe that the tariffs are a good idea, or maybe they believe that the tariffs are not a good idea, or maybe they'll say the tariffs are a terrible idea, or the tariffs are a good idea or a great idea. Okay, those, depending on how you phrase it, you either have the burden of proof or you don't. But there's still a talk to be had with those people. And it's just like, oh, they're not part of the conversation. Okay, that doesn't negate their stance, by the way, even if that idea was true that they're not part of the conversation or they have nothing to offer, which are not true. It doesn't negate their stance at all. That they believe in God or they don't believe in God, and that's what their position is. They're still part of the conversation, whatever the conversation is. This is ridiculous.
Anymore. So that was my point. So this was a critique of atheists, just as I accepted Maximum Atheist critique of Christians. Maximum Atheist then responded to my tweet by saying, well, prove it does, I'll wait. And I was thinking, prove what does? And then I guess what Maximum Atheist was saying here is that I should prove God does exist.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, that's an odd claim. I've never claimed to be able to prove God exists, nor would I claim that one is rationally compelled to be able to prove God does exist.
Okay, then by your own standards, since you can't prove that there is a God, then you're a weak theist, which means then you're not part of the conversation then, right? Remember you said earlier, if you just have a belief, then you're not part of the conversation. So I guess you're not part of the conversation because you're not making the claim that there is a God. You're saying that you believe in God, so you're not part of the conversation anymore. Oops.
Just like the inability to prove something exists is not a ground to believe it does exist. So the ability to prove something exists is not a necessary ground to believe it does exist.
The inability to prove something exists is absolutely a criteria for not believing in the existence of that thing. The inability to disprove it doesn't mean anything. The ability or inability to prove it absolutely means you should be skeptical about it. You aren't. You have ties to God for many multiple reasons, some of which I know, some of which I could guess at. Okay, you have a career that relies on your belief in God in many ways. You have books out there. You have a channel. You financially are incentivized to keep this belief going to some degree. Now, that's not the whole reason why you believe in God. There's multiple reasons why you believe in God. Okay, I know that. I don't know all of them. Like I said, I could guess on some of them. But I could point out and say, hey, look, just from the fact that your career depends on your belief in God, that's a big incentive. If you suddenly came out as an atheist, all these books, that they still sell, but the publishers might not want anything to do with you ever again because they're theistic publishers and maybe they don't want to publish anything from an atheist. Maybe they'll pull the books. It's a risk. I don't know that they would or wouldn't. I don't know, but it's a risk. You definitely have to change your channel's name or get a new channel and start over again. That's an uphill battle, you know. Will you become a big atheist or an unknown? Who knows? I don't know. You know, it's a risk. It's a huge risk to take. So you're incentivized to stay a Christian, at least by all outside appearance. Maybe internally you don't believe anymore, but you're like, it's just too big of a financial risk to give all this up. So I'm going to keep pretending I'm a Christian. Maybe. I'm just saying, like, just from the fact of some cost, you know, being a thing that people have. And the point is not to say that's why you're a Christian. No, I think you have many, many other reasons why you have a belief. And I know that you do because we had a talk about it. But the point here is the fact that you have a monetary incentive to be Christian is an indication of that somebody could say, well, you're just, you know, they could use that in some way, shape, or form to try to knock you down rather than knock down your argument. And so you're not knocking down any argument. You're just saying, well, this word should be this word should be that, or you know, and you're not really, you're saying, you know, on one hand you're saying you don't have any conversation to add, or that you don't need to prove God. It's like, well, which is it, you know? Anyways, I kind of, maybe I went off on a tangent there. I don't know.
Those are just two equal and opposite errors. So it was kind of ironic that a maximum atheist was critiquing the atheist version of that error by essentially flipping around to their own error by thinking you have to be able to prove God does exist to believe God does exist.
I don't see how those two things are equivalent, but you know, he wants you to prove that God exists, and you're now retreating to the position that you can't prove God exists, or that you never made that claim. But at the same time, you're complaining that atheists do that, and it's bad when atheists do it, but it's fine when theists do it.
Now, with that said, I want to take a step back and just offer some further comments about truth and God and atheism.
No, this should be good.
Well, let's think about God here as a philosophical concept.
Oh, what does that mean? A philosophical concept? What? You mean like an object of the mind, like numbers?
Where God is the idea of an impersonal, metaphysically necessary being with certain perfections.
Okay, impersonal being. What?
Of an impersonal, metaphysically necessary being with certain
impersonal, metaphysical being that's necessary. All right, I already reject it because it preassumes it's necessary. In fact, it preassumes all those things are things, that it's a being. How do you get to that conclusion that it is that thing? What methodology are you using to get to that conclusion about what you're saying that God is? It's philosophical. I'm just saying that God is this. Well, okay. I'm just saying that, you know, Superman has these powers, you know. Okay, fine. You know, Superman is a philosophical idea. All right, cool.
Perfections. And the question is, what grounds are there philosophically to believe in the existence of such a being?
you defined it into existence the moment that you said it was necessary. So you've already negated logic, so you can't possibly have any logical reasons because presuppositionalism breaks logic. So
Now, if we want to talk first of all about proof as the standard, well, then you have to define what you mean by proof.
Yes. Wouldn't that be nice to define terms? I don't know. How about you define what proof is? And then I'll tell you whether or not I accept what you got. So by proof, you mean a bunch of arguments. That's not proof to me. I mean, in informal logic, you can call something a proof, like you can call a mathematical proof. I don't like using the word proof, though, but I mean, that's just a personal preference. For me, proof is reserved to, I have a stuffed bunny. There's a stuffed bunny. The proof of the stuffed bunny is that. That's the proof. I mean, if you want more than that, I'm not sure what I could offer you. But like I said, the proof that I have of everything around me is the sort of proof that I'm looking for when it comes to anything, even God. Okay? And this shell game of, well, what do you mean by proof? Like you don't understand the word proof. Why not, well, okay, it's nice to have clear definitions, but you don't always get those. But yeah, proof is essentially empirical evidence, repeatable test. That's what people, well, I mean, you could guess that that's what people mean at any rate, but okay, anyways.
And if we mean by proof mathematical proof, then what you're saying is in order to believe God exists, you'd have to have an argument that is logically valid with premises that can only be denied on pain of irrationality. So the premises are themselves compelling. You cannot deny them and be rational.
That wouldn't be mathematical proof. Mathematics involves numbers. You couldn't have mathematical proof of an abstract object of the mind that you're presenting and calling God. You're describing formal logic.
And then the conclusion of God's existence just follows from those premises. And so that would be the highest sort of standard of proof for the existence of God. And again, there's no proof, I believe, that God exists like that.
I agree. Every argument I've read or heard has had more than one logical fallacy. Thus, I'm skeptical of them. So I kept trying to get to, and this is, why does Randal believe in God? Like I said, many reasons, and one being financial, potentially. I maybe that's the weakest reason, but it definitely, I think it's fair to say that is a reason, at least that we can identify. And we might be wrong. Maybe he's like, I don't care. Whatever. If I decide there's not a God, I don't care about what happens. So I could be completely wrong. So I did go off into that weird tangent. I was like, where am I going with this? But it's nice that you acknowledge that there's no proof for God. Why do you still believe in God then?
Of course, the ontological argument sought to provide such a proof. And I don't think the ontological argument succeeds in that ground. At most, what it succeeds in doing is saying that if God exists, God must exist. But
yeah, the ontological argument is all sorts of screwed up, logically speaking. It tries to define God into existence. The maximum pizza must maximally exist. Okay, cool. Give me my maximally great pizza. It's just incoherent nonsense. You can't define things into reality. It doesn't work that way. So we agree that it fails, but we disagree on why it fails.
But if it's possible that God exists, then God must exist. But that sort of raises the question, okay, then is it possible that God does exist? Because we have different intuitions. Some intuitions support the possibility that God does exist. Some intuitions support the possibility that God does not exist.
Well, it's interesting because you said you want a definition of proof, but now you don't want a definition of God. You made a philosophical definition of God that already said it was a necessary thing, that was impersonal. The other thing I forget now, but how do you know that God is that in the first place? What method would be utilized to discover that that is God? So God is, let me get my God out again. So God is this. This is God. Okay, that's my claim. Now, what method should I use that would convince you that this is God? What methodology would that be? I don't know. I have no idea. But that's my burden, is to do whatever it is that I think would prove that this is God to you. Now, it might not work. Okay. I could give all, if this is what God is, then it is God. I named it God, so it is God. I mean, what else could be God? Can you prove it isn't God? What methodology would you have to prove it's not God? How do you know that this is not in fact God? Well, didn't God make all of creation? And this is a thing that was 3D printed, but it's part of the creation, so it's part of God. So it is God, and so am I, and so is everything. So technically I'm right. This is God in that version of God. But how do I know anything about what God is in the first place? That's something that needs to be explored and answered in some way, shape, or form. But that's, of course, outside the scope of his video here. But at any rate, it is something that I would love to have the answer to. My faucet did weird things. That's fun. Okay. But yeah, if there's no valid or there's no sound argument for God, and there's no empirical evidence for God, and there's no repeatable test for God, the reasons to believe in God start diminishing. Maybe it's a financial reason. It is a reason. It's not, and it's logical to some degree, but is it a truth-seeking thing? No. Well, your family and friends might disown you if you stop believing in God. That's an emotional reason. You find solace in the comfort of the familiarity of church people, and you would lose that if you stopped believing in God. These are all emotional reasons that you might keep up the belief of God. Also, the very fact of the matter is, all people, myself included, we all have ideas that we're used to. And it's important to note the idea might be something you like, or it might be something you hate, but you're used to that idea. And challenging that idea makes you uncomfortable to do. And so your brain brings up all this anxiety and self-defense mechanisms to protect that idea, because it's used to that idea and it doesn't want to let it go. And so we have to get used to challenging our ideas all the time. And especially when we really care about those ideas, we have to challenge them. And when you notice that somebody else isn't doing that, and you tell them, hey, you need to do that, well, that's nice, but you need to make sure you're doing it yourself first. And it's kind of like that thing in the Bible is like, don't point out the log or the twig in their eye, or the what's he called? What's the thing called? The toothpick in their eye when you've got a log hanging out of your eye, right? And it's there, so I don't know, but yeah, at any rate, I think that's really all I want to comment on, I know he keeps going here, but I you know, I'm kind of I think I'm done because the main points I wanted to cover was the word atheist and what that means, and the argument against what the word means doesn't work because natural language doesn't care. You know, and I had that guy on whenever that bleep that was that just kept denying what the word atheist meant, no matter what I told him or how I explained it. He was like, "No, it can't be that." He's like, he fought so hard against this idea of what it means. I'm like, I don't get it. I still don't believe in God. What's the point in arguing about this word? It doesn't change anything. I still don't believe in God. So it changed nothing. And Randal, like I said, he's a great. I have no problems with him. I think he's an interesting guy. I'm glad that he's very modern. You know, he's fine with science. He doesn't deny science. He's fine with biological evolution, the age of the Earth. He's not pseudoscientific. He's on the cusp. He's like right there of being an atheist, but there's stuff that's keeping his God belief active. And my brother and I talk about belief in God a lot offline and such. And he tells me that he doesn't know why he believes in God, but he does. And he doesn't know what, if anything, would ever make him not believe in God, but that it's possible, he thinks. And it's like, yeah, okay, cool. You know, who knows? I don't know why your brain does that. And I don't know if it's dangerous to try to mess with that. Like it could cause him mental harm to shake loose that belief for all I know. So I'm leaving it alone. Not that I would try to actively deconvert somebody anyways, but I'm like, hey, all right, you believe in that. Whatever. Who cares? You know? It's interesting that you believe because it gives us something to talk about, you know? And so Randal's not out there causing problems in the way that many theist apologists are in that sense. But I would still wonder what it is that's keeping the faith going. Why keep believing this? And maybe, like my brother, he doesn't ultimately know the answer to that question. So, are we humans stuck with our brain believing or not believing in God? And if we are, then what? Or is it that some brains are stuck and other brains are more flexible? I don't know. Now you're talking neuropsychology, right? You're like neurologist people might know the answer to that. I have no idea. I know I used to believe and now I don't. Could I believe again? Well, if I had evidence, I could. But it wouldn't even be belief at that point. I would just know. I would just agree. If I saw a thing, bing, and it's like, I'm God, I'd be like, okay, cool, as long as everyone else can see it and hear it. And I'm like, well, what do you mean you're God? What's that like? I've got all these questions, and if it answered them, then okay, cool. God exists. Great. Groovy. Let's do something with that. Of course, that would fundamentally change everything about the world completely. It would just change everything. And that's, that would make an interesting movie or a book or something, but it's a story that hasn't happened yet in reality. And so it's just a story. But people, for whatever reasons, believe the story is true, that once upon a time, God did say, hey, I'm God, how's it going? And people are like, okay, cool, But God stopped doing that for whatever reason. Because, I don't know. He got bored of people or something. God is an idea that we hold in our brain. That is for sure. That no doubt there. Is God more than that? Well, I don't even know what God is. So back to that problem. Well, we could just assign arbitrary attributes to a philosophical idea of God. We can, but why would we do that? Well, because we need something to define God as. Yeah, but how do we know that God is any of those things in the first place? Whatever God actually is, that's up to God to be that thing. And the problem is, unlike other things that we've discovered as humans, it seems to me that the definition for God came first and not the other. And for everything else, it seems like the other way around. Like we see a thing where like, okay, this is a metal object. It has some sort of device here that could be called a hinge, and it has a functionality that we call this a nail clipper. You know, and you could break down the component parts of it, and you know, whatever. And so we've defined it by, we didn't define it and then make it. We made it and then defined it. You know, kind of like you know, that this is metal, for example. Like, what is metal? What is the word metal? We found metal in nature, and then we said, we're going to call that metal, and this is what metal is. We gave the definition later. But with God, we give the definition of God first, and yet there isn't a God to point to. It's not like the nail clipper where you can go, this is God. You know, you can't point to God. You can point to people's idea of God. Like you say, hey, here's Shiva the Destroyer, and here's what Shiva the Destroyer is like, and here's what it does in the story. And it's like, yeah, and you could do that with Jar Jar Binks, you could do that with Spider-Man or Superman, you can do it with fictional characters. We definitely can make up stuff. Now, how do we determine what's made up versus what's really real? And if we can't show that it's really real, then why keep believing in it? Well, the answer might be we have to. Maybe our brain's forcing us to. And if that's the case, okay, cool. Let's admit to that. And it'd be cool if we could find out that for sure. You know, somebody somewhere is going to have to raise some money to get some neurologists on that and figure out if we can, you know, look at the brain and tell us if maybe people are stuck with God. I don't know. Maybe people are stuck with not God. You know, maybe you could turn it on and off if you wiggle something around in the brain or something. I don't know. You know, there's that God helmet thing. That's interesting. What's even more interesting about the God helmet was the placebo God helmet. So I wonder if there's a non-God helmet. If we could put a thing on people where they would experience not God, and if we could do a nocebo on that. You know, I don't know. You know, these are experiments I'd love to run, but I'm not a scientist. I don't know how to fund that. I have no idea. Somebody somewhere is going to have to do it. That's not me. Anyway, okay. One big giant tangent. What are words? Let's summarize what that is. Atheist is without God. I don't believe in God, and also there is no God depending on what God is, and also sometimes I don't even know what the word is, so I think it's incoherent. So I'm kind of an atheist, but I'm not a full atheist, because atheism states that the word God is so incoherent that nobody should use the word God, as they use the word God to reject the word God. So it's kind of weird. But at any rate, I'm many labels, and my label skeptic, and what I mean by skeptic isn't what everybody else means by skeptic. So it all gets confusing, and let's not lose focus on the core thing of, do we believe in X, Y, and Z? Do we not believe in X, Y, and Z? And what reasons do we have for that belief? Let's be honest about that. Let's evaluate that. Let's tackle that and see if we're willing and able to challenge our beliefs. And if not, let's be honest about that. You know, and then say, okay, maybe I could train myself to do that. Maybe I can make myself challenge those beliefs. Maybe not, but I think it's worth trying at any rate. So that's what I've got for you. Until we have empirical evidence, repeatable test, or a valid and sound argument, We should be skeptical of the conclusions. Did I offer that any of those in this video? I don't know. So yeah, Nerdy Road, that isn't God. I saw God, and it was blue. Yeah, no, that was God. It's absolute. What are you talking about? This guy, right? Oh, you thought? Oh, the rabbit. See, you came in later. So yeah, this is the false God, and this is the real God. So it's just, I'm sorry to confuse you there, Nerdy. And I know you love it when I put God on my head. So okay. I'm going to take a God now. Yeah, sure. Let's see. God's a placeholder for things we haven't explained yet, or some kind of ultimate authority figure that can appeal to, so they don't have to think they're difficult problems. Yeah. Sometimes God is those things, And okay, John is out of here. Goodbye. Anyways, but yeah, sometimes God is like that. Sometimes God isn't. Depends on the person. Depends on the religion. Depends on a lot of things. I do see God being used kind of like how the old maps would have here there be dragons, and they were like, we don't, So God does seem to be like, how do we answer this question? God did it, for now until we figure it out. And then, well, once we figure that out, then God did that thing. We'll just move God back. But God is certainly an interesting concept and is useful or dangerous depending on how we use that concept. So that's something. And it's certainly interesting to talk about. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about it. So, but if it's real, well, that I don't believe it is, and I have no reason to believe it is as yet. But I constantly challenge that idea by doing what I'm doing here. So that's all. All right. Yeah. Type in Finn and be skeptical and post comments. And hey, by the way, before you go, if you didn't see my last video where I announced it, I want your help in doing the thing, so go check out that video. And also, I'm doing on Tuesday. It is, yeah, Tuesday. I'm going to be talking to a guy on his channel. I posted that in the community section. So yeah, because I can't remember when that is. I guess I could pull it up. I mean, that would make sense, but they're just referencing it like I'm doing right now. Okay, let's see. Tuesday, 27th at 8:30 EST. I'll be over at Truth Over Tea. So he's going to interview me and all that. And I typed in Finn, but I'm still here. So I broke my own rule that I have, I guess. I don't know.